In today's Farm Report, President Barack Obama released his proposed fiscal year 2016 budget earlier this week. The USDA released its budget as well. Gary Crawford with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has more.
We've just got to be smarter about how we pay for our priorities, and that's what my budget does.
President Obama's words as he sent his budget proposal for fiscal year 2016 to Congress and at the Agriculture Department, USDA, releasing its proposed budget numbers.
But a budget actually, I think, is obviously much more than just numbers. It's an expression of values, and I think it ought to be a roadmap to a brighter and better future.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack telling reporters he's proposing a total USDA spending level that would be 3% higher than this year, but still below what was proposed back in 2010. Vilsack proposing more money for research, more money for combating the rise of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics, even more loan and grant money for beginning farmers. One possibly controversial proposal, though, is a cut of about $1.5 billion for crop insurance subsidies. Vilsack telling reporters the background for this proposal.
When Congress passed the Farm Bill, one of the challenges of passing the Farm Bill was to create sufficient savings to satisfy everyone that we were going to, over the time, spend less money. It was anticipated that we would spend a significant amount on crop insurance, but that we would spend less on other safety net programs compared to direct payments.
But with crop prices plunging precipitously over this last year,
it's anticipated that we're actually potentially going to have to spend a lot more on ARC and PLC. So if you want to stay generally within the budget savings that have been identified for that safety net, you have to make some adjustments.
And crop insurance is one area being looked at, especially after a recent Inspector General audit
that essentially said that our preventive planning payments could be adjusted a bit, and also taking a look at the harvest price loss coverage, which has received some criticism in terms of the level of subsidy in many cases, and the opportunity that it creates for a fairly significant payout.
So with payments going up for farm safety net programs like PLC, price loss coverage, and ARC, agricultural risk coverage, and the adjustments downward in some crop insurance subsidies,
you end up with pretty much in the same ballpark as what the Farm Bill proposed.
One other major proposal taking food safety and inspection duties now carried out by about 14 federal agencies, but mostly USDA and FDA, and making one food safety organization. In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
The North American Free Trade Agreement is now over 21 years old. So what are the impacts on U.S. ag trade and trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico over the last 2+ decades? Stephen Sondheiser and other USDA researchers conducted a study on NAFTA's impacts on ag trade.
All of these tariffs and quotas that used to be in effect impeding agricultural trade and other types of trade don't exist anymore.
And with NAFTA nations going to zero tariffs in 2008,
we're getting into the point in time where one almost takes for granted the fact that these trade barriers are all gone.
And that has led to a significant rise in ag trade among NAFTA members.
In 1993, the last year before NAFTA was implemented, the total value of intra-regional agricultural trade among all three countries was $16.7 billion. And in 2013, the total value was about $82 billion.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Keeping a pulse on the farm economy can be difficult sometimes. That's why economists usually use farmland values as an index. But lately, as the USDA's Gary Crawford reports, even land prices are giving economists a hard time at keeping track of the pulse.
Ever since corn, soybean, and wheat prices started plummeting in late 2013, many analysts had been predicting a collapse in agricultural land values, but many have been surprised at how well land is holding its value. Demand for good quality land continues. Rob Johansson, acting chief economist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, told us we're starting to see some changes in land values. Looking at the latest Kansas City Federal Reserve report, it shows that
the rapid increase in land values over the last 5 years has been slowing considerably. It is still slightly positive. It has not gone negative yet, which once it would go negative, that would imply that land value prices are lower than they were the previous year. But they're still a little bit higher than they were last year.
And in fact, a drop in the value of farmland below the year before is something that does not happen very often.
Looking back over the last, say, 13 years or so, the only time that they actually did lose value relative to the year before was, and this, of course I'm talking nominal here, not real terms, was after the Great Recession in 2009. We can go back, look in previous years and see other occasions when that's happened, like such as in the 80s. But right now, at least over the most recent history, we've had a pretty good increase in the value of agricultural land.
But after the sharp spiral upward in values, the market is certainly in a correction mode now, but it's not correcting as sharply or as rapidly as crop prices. And Rob Johansson says that's how it usually works. Yes, land value does follow the crop price and income trend, but
it is also something that probably lags a little bit in terms of what you see on the commodity prices. Land values are certainly negotiated between the landowner and perhaps their leasee for a year or maybe even longer time, and certainly those producers can also lock in prices for the commodities. So there is a little bit of stickiness in how fast land values will be changing.
And also, most economists say the farmland market's not just influenced by commodity prices. Other factors include the quality of the land, the region of the country, and also interest rates can play a big part. So what's going to happen later this year with land values? Rob Johansson admits
we don't exactly know what they'll do,
but everybody's going to keep a close eye on them. And of course, all it would take would be a big weather problem causing a big crop problem to send commodity prices up again, possibly pulling land values up there with them. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Need an example of how the North American Free Trade Agreement has benefited ag trade for the U.S., all three NAFTA member nations for that matter? USDA researcher Stephen Zonheiser, among those recently conducting a study on that matter, says look no further than meat trade.
You have now linkages in production that cut across international boundaries.
So, for example, U.S. grain and oilseed is exported as feed to livestock in Canada and Mexico.
Those livestock are brought to maturity and slaughtered and processed and sold in Mexican supermarkets or in Canadian supermarkets. At the same time, you can also find meat products that were made in the United States.
This has allowed firms that market meat products to expand their focus from a local, even national scope to international.
That gives that firm a much bigger set of opportunities than existed in years past for NAFTA,
when it faced tariffs to export goods to any of the NAFTA nations. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We are in the midst of the flu season, and that means more than ever that we need to be washing our hands thoroughly and properly. But as USDA's Gary Crawford reports, that's not the case for many Americans.
We are right in the middle of flu season. Flu viruses are everywhere. We can get them in the air by touching something. And surveys show we have all kinds of bacteria in our kitchens as well. So what can we do? Well, University of Arizona researcher Kelly Riddles has this brand new concept.
Hand washing is your most important strategy for reducing your exposure to germs.
I like clean hands and I cannot lie. Wash them, rub them, and please make sure you scrub them.
Now, according to Kelly and many experts, we're supposed to wash our hands every time we are doing something that involves a higher risk of coming into contact with or spreading viruses and bacteria.
Which would be things like changing diapers or before preparing food, to make sure that you're doing it properly.
Which Kelly Riddle says most people don't wash their hands every time they should, and when they do, they don't follow the recommended procedure.
A 20 to 30 second wash cycle using soap and warm water.
But most of us don't have time or the patience. It takes a lot more than 30 seconds to go through that process. I know. I recorded it myself. First, getting to the wash station. Yeah, getting the water running there. And waiting for it to warm up. And then hitting the soap dispenser and rubbing the hands for 20 seconds. And then rinsing the hands completely. And completely drying the hands and going back to work. Now, who has that kind of time? Obviously, not many people, since Kelly says consumer surveys show we don't follow that procedure. So Kelly admits
our recommendation for how often you should wash your hands may not be practical.
But what's the alternative? Now, we see these hand sanitizer stations at food stores and other places. Many of us think, hey, if I use that stuff, I'm good to go. And I see people squirt it on, rub it on for about 3 seconds, and they are off. Kelly says all that does is give us a false sense of sterile hand security, because if you read the label on those those products, which none of us do.
The recommendation is to leave it on your hands for 30 seconds. And so you need to make sure your hand stays wet for 30 seconds, and many people are not doing that. And so if you're not doing that, then you're not reaching the sanitizing effect that your product is promising.
Oh, and studies also have found that antibacterial soap that we spend extra money on for the kitchen and bathroom,
it doesn't seem to have an additional benefit when compared to regular soap and water.
So we're back to the seemingly impossible quest of trying to get us to wash our hands when we are supposed to and how we're supposed to.
To dream the impossible dream.
So, Kelly, good luck with getting us to do the right hand-washing thing.
I'm going to keep trying.
No one can do more. In Washington, Gary Crawford washing my hands of this whole thing for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Various tools are at USDA's disposal to keep U.S. export markets open to our ag goods by assuring a high standard of food safety and quality. USDA Undersecretary Michael Skew says one example of this is certification processes.
We issued about 892,000 certificates just last year.
And the Undersecretary says through education, most nations now understand the requirements and processes U.S. ag products must go through, as well as the great lengths to assure food safety to our consumers, as well as consumers abroad.
So those certificates are critical. And I think those certificates with the USDA backing, I think those help us get a lot of products into countries that we may not normally have access to. But because of those certificates and the requirements that companies have to go through in order to obtain them, or traders, that goes a long way, I think, in building confidence in some of these foreign governments and some of our trading partners that they are getting the very best.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.